so much. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to you all, and welcome to this From Promise to Action session. My name is Jennifer Lewis, and I serve as the Deputy Director for Programming on USAID's Anti-Corruption Task Force. I also serve as the agency's long-term OGP point of contact, a role which has afforded me a front seat in terms of witnessing the transformational nature of this partnership. I'm so pleased to be able to moderate this session today. Before I introduce our panelists, I'll quickly go over a few details. Please note that this session is being recorded and will also offer simultaneous translation in Spanish and English. You can switch the language as relevant to you by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to take a brief moment to set the stage for our conversation today and why we at USAID believe it is so important. As we celebrate OGP's growth and success over these first 10 years, it's worth mentioning how truly vital this organization has become. As a global partnership, OGP has grown in ways we could only have dreamed of in 2011. Over the past decade, its global presence and visibility have provided a platform for promoting cutting-edge norms in democracy, anti-corruption, and good governance, on everything from promoting open contracting and beneficial ownership transparency to open parliaments and digital technologies that facilitate access to justice. And as a partnership, we have welcomed in many new members across all branches and levels of government and broadened our stakeholder base. As a global platform, OGP has raised collective ambition and peer learning at the country and at the sectoral level. In essence, OGP today is simultaneously a standard, a resource, and a community. Last week, President Biden hosted the Summit for Democracy with world leaders and civil society activists to unpack the key challenges facing democracy, including authoritarianism, corruption, and threats to human rights. We heard a range of leaders make comments and commitments across recurring themes, including the need for democratic cooperation on emerging technologies, countering the increase of disinformation, defending independent institutions, including the judiciary and free media, integrating and elevating the fight against corruption, and of course, addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on democracy. And as was mentioned by the president, the summit has now kicked off a year of action by participants to make democracies more responsive and resilient, and ultimately to build a broader community of partners committed to global democratic renewal. This year of action will be a critical period for confirming that the commitments made at the summit do not just exist on paper, that they are not mere empty promises. Over the course of this next year, governments will need to move from promise to action and take credible steps towards implementation. When we gather again for next December's summit, countries will need to have made viable progress in implementation. And that is because many of the commitments made last week have the potential to truly transform the democracy landscape over the next decade and potentially beyond. But as we say in English, the proof will be in the pudding. We believe there is an opportunity for OGP to leverage its existing infrastructure and relationships to accelerate the co-creation and implementation of these ambitious reforms within OGP member countries, as well as provide space for peer exchange and learning to promote summit themes and norms. This will be key to making these commitments a reality and to ensuring accountability. Because of this, I'm proud to share that USAID has recently increased our overall grant to OGP in order to support the development and prioritization of Summit for Democracy commitments in OGP national action plans, in particular those in line with the Summit for Democracy's thematic priorities, reforms on anti-corruption, civic space, access to justice, digital governance, and independent media. We believe that embedding these commitments into OGP can help ensure these reforms are locally driven and owned. Today, we will hear from a variety of friends of OGP on the ways in which this platform can be used to deliver on these commitments. I'm pleased to introduce Tinatien Ninua, who is Deputy Director of OGP's Independent Reporting Mechanism, Carlos Pimentel, who is the Director of Public Procurement within the government of the Dominican Republic, Lilia Afrikian, who is the OGP point of contact in the Office of the Prime Minister of Armenia, and Michael Jarvis, who is the Director of the Transparency and Accountability Initiative. Welcome to you all. Tinatin, I'll send the first question your way. What lessons do we have in implementing high-level global commitments through mechanisms such as OGP?
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on the panel as part of this very interesting discussion. Well, to go straight to your question, I think we all know that global summits are meant to be action-forcing moments, but we also know too well that they don't always end up into concrete country action and results. Last week's Summit for Democracy was a political kickoff moment where we saw a lot of heads of states making speeches, but there was a big variance on the focus and specificity of actual commitments. We have seen, we ran some numbers and saw that 66 countries actually made at least one commitment at the summit, and 45 of them were OGP countries. So summit did make some promises, but again, the opportunity of follow-up and implementation will also vary a lot depending on how concrete these promises have been. OGP as a global partnership of 79 countries offers a unique opportunity since it rests on the premise of partnership, equal partnership between governments and civil society, and is well positioned to take forward Summit for Democracy commitments where relevant for open government. Well, we have seen from the previous global summits that integration into OGP action plans is one way to get better results. For example, after the London Anti-Corruption Summit in 2016, the OGP platform has supported its countries to grow, supported the countries in the political momentum to commit to beneficial ownership transparency through an approach that combines government reform and civil society oversight, peer learning, and a strong accountability mechanism, the independent reporting mechanism, which is the team I represent. Since then, in the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen an exponential growth in the number of countries that have integrated beneficial ownership commitments in their national action plans and have committed to create registers and to open them up for public scrutiny. So OGP has helped to take sometimes very high-level statements and turn them into specific planned out and implementable commitments that are then monitored by the independent reporting mechanism. If some of you were part of the anti-corruption plenary earlier today, you have seen a concrete example of how Nigeria has done that. So consequently, altogether, now 1/3 of OGP national members have made a total of 52 commitments on beneficial ownership. And every year, more and more members continue to use their action plans to advance these reforms. Just to give an example, Kenya, for example, has introduced a commitment which obliges companies bidding for public contracts to enter their beneficial ownership information into public database. Latvia also made an information on beneficial owners of companies publicly available, free of charge, and in open data format. So the way OGP works, it seeks to encourage greater ambition over time because action plans are quite short. They last for 2 years, could be a bit longer as well. They encourage experimentation and allow for correction. Since they're co-created between governments and civil society and evaluated by the IRM, this can incentivize them to become increasingly ambitious over time and realistic at the same time. So, for example, the government of Ukraine first created an open registry in 2015 and then became the first OGP country to commit to verification of that beneficial ownership data. And Ukraine now spearheads a second surge on audits and verification of BO data. So now looking ahead, there will be 60 OGP countries co-creating their action plans next year. And there is a big opportunity there. As I've said earlier, there have been 45 countries that made at least one commitment at the Summit for Democracy last week. So the co-creation processes that are coming up offer an opportunity to concretize some of these promises made at the summit and turn them into commitments that will be assessed by the IRM. Also, the countries that have recently submitted their action plans are already in the implementation phase, they still have the window for creating what we call challenge commitments to update and strengthen their current action plans in the view of the promises made at the summit.
Great, thank you so much. And that's, it's really great to hear how many opportunities may exist in this space. I'll just note that, of course, we heard some initial commitments last week, but the formal written commitments by countries are due at the beginning of January. So we're hoping to see quite a number of more commitments in this space. Michael, TAI has a unique vantage point on global initiatives, of course. How have we seen OGP help translate global commitments into actual changes?
Yes, thanks, Jen, and thanks all for the invitation to be here. And for those who don't know, Transparency and Accountability Initiative is a donor collaborative. So we have 7 funded members, all of whom have been supporters of Open Government Partnership. And part of the reason they're supporters is a real sense that a mechanism like OGP can provide a platform not only to showcase the best ideas, but then have some accountability for follow through. And I wanted to go back to that same example of the 2016 anti-corruption summit that the UK government hosted. And there was some analysis done by Transparency International UK in the aftermath of that. And only around 1 in 5 of the commitments made at that summit are demonstrably fulfilled. And not all of them could even be verified and tracked. And there's a higher percentage of those that are fulfilled that got translated into OGP national action plans. And that's because it does provide this ready mechanism to actually sort of embed those commitments into a process where there is multi-stakeholder analysis of it, accountability around follow through, and a space to sort of reflect on what's working and what's not. So I do think OGP has an important role to play, not only for the Summit for Democracy commitments, but potentially other venues as well, where these types of governance related pledges are made. The other value of it, I think, is that it can provide a space for a community to evolve around these commitments. And so you get some dynamics of peer competition between countries to be ambitious and to follow through, but also support, like helping each other on the realities of implementation and providing encouragement and lessons learned. And the example cited of beneficial ownership, I think, is a great one. That beneficial ownership leadership group that emerged through OGP, with bringing together countries that have made commitments around that topic, has kept momentum on that issue. And having a platform like OGP to shepherd that, I think, has been really valuable. And what I would hope is that we can find sort of similar ways of building that type of group enterprise around similar commitments on particular issues coming out of the Summit for Democracy. So yes, we need to wait for what we can analyze from the written commitments when they come in early January. But it strikes me that OGP and other venues could be great places to then shepherd the conversations around countries that have made similar commitments on similar issues. And that beneficial ownership leadership group is a great example that I think we could model and create these kinds of cohorts. Perhaps I can say a little on that later in the session. So I'll pause there. Thanks, Jen.
Great, thank you, Michael. And I am very much looking forward to hearing you sharing more about the cohort idea, but agree that the peer learning is one of the really the most attractive pieces here. I'd like to turn this over to Carlos to hear a little bit about the experience in the Dominican Republic, but in particular, the role that global platforms such as OGP can play in helping governments deliver on commitments and on reform agendas.
Sí, muchas gracias por la invitación y la oportunidad de compartir algunas reflexiones tratando de utilizar el contexto nacional. Actualmente la República Dominicana vive un proceso importante de reformas, de transformaciones en el marco institucional, algunas previstas desde hace algún tiempo en la agenda de demanda y reivindicaciones de la sociedad, que en los actuales momentos cruzan por niveles de repensar y redefinir, tomando en cuenta no solamente el contexto institucional, sino también el contexto de la intensidad de nuestra democracia, pero esto sumado, y no podemos dejar de lado para esta reflexión, el impacto de la pandemia en el mundo, en la región y en nuestros países. Probablemente el contexto internacional y el apoyo desde las plataformas globales de manera muy particular, desde la Alianza de Gobierno Abierto, contribuye e incide de manera medular en nuestros países en este momento, que tenemos que atender problemas de orden político, de orden estructural sistémico vinculado a la débil institucionalidad, pero que obligatoriamente tenemos que incluir en la mirada una mirada de derecho, una mirada que permita poner el ojo de atención en la gente, en la ciudadanía, y que permita garantizar la vida digna de la gente. Y por eso la plataforma OGP, más que una plataforma que permite asumir compromisos en los estados que vayan en el orden del fortalecimiento institucional o en el orden de lucha contra la corrupción, tiene una mirada fundamental en este momento, y es que todo lo que podamos hacer vinculado a esas reformas, a esas transformaciones, tienen que tener a la gente como eje fundamental. Pero otro elemento muy importante en el caso de la República Dominicana es que nuestra agenda de reforma y transformaciones tiene que ser repensada. Tiene que ser repensada desde una mirada multidimensional y desde una mirada también multidisciplinaria, que permita traer a la mesa nuevas soluciones de problemas viejos que ameritan la integración de propuestas, de acciones, de compromisos que se deben construir de manera colectiva y de manera colaborativa. Es una oportunidad para revisar la receta que tenemos, las recetas históricas, ponerla a un lado y tener la oportunidad de co-crear de manera juntos, de manera colectiva, partiendo de ese contexto para mejorar la institucionalidad, mejorar la democracia, garantizar derechos, pero sobre todo teniendo como sujeto protagónico la ciudadanía en ese nivel de participación, porque desde mi punto de vista, una de las mayores contribuciones que puede hacer OGP a la agenda nacional es que podamos pasar de la democracia representativa restringida, a una democracia participativa, amplia, o lo que yo he denominado muchas veces avanzar en una línea de democratizar la democracia, que nos permitamos avanzar en ese rol protagónico del ciudadano, construyendo, sugiriendo e implantando políticas públicas, normas que permitan, sobre la base de una comprensión concreta y de la realidad, pues transformar las relaciones societales en nuestros países, donde existen muchos niveles de desigualdades, muchos niveles de pobreza y de exclusión. Necesitamos una agenda que retome la democracia desde los más amplios niveles de participación, con todos los sectores, con los sectores que hacen vida en la vida nacional, e incluyendo los sectores excluidos, en el caso de la República Dominicana, los dominicanos de ascendencia haitiana, las personas con discapacidad, las mujeres, la población LGTBI, y que sobre esa inclusión podamos construir políticas que den esencia a la democracia. Entonces, tener una mirada de una plataforma global como OGP nos permite no inventar la rueda en algunos casos. Hay experiencias con éxito, otras que no han tenido éxito, otras que pueden servir para mirarla, para traerla y adaptarla a nuestra realidad, nunca para traer experiencias, como dicen, enlatadas, pero por lo menos que nos permita para la conversación. Y por último, y lo más importante de la plataforma OGP, es la presión a los gobiernos para que pongan información a disposición de la ciudadanía, información amplia, diversa, reutilizable, para que la conversación, para que la agenda pública pueda tener insumos necesarios para que el diálogo pueda ser mucho más constructivo. Y creo que OGP contribuye también con esa agenda para que los estados pongan esa plataforma, y para que los estados también, aquellos que donde hay régimen más autoritario, se sienten en la mesa y podamos construir estado, sociedad, sector privado, una mejor sociedad. Y por eso nosotros entendemos que la plataforma de OGP es fundamental para nosotros.
Great, thank you so much, Carlos. And I love the idea of throwing out the old recipes and bringing in the new. Maybe that makes OGP the chef or the kitchen. I'm not quite sure how that works. Lilia, I'd be curious for your perspective as well. Again, what role can global platforms like OGP play in helping a government like yours deliver on its reform commitments?
Thank you, Jennifer. Greetings from Armenia once again. It's my pleasure to be a part of this discussion and meet new and old colleagues. Armenia joined OGP from its start and has gone hand in hand these 10 years. We have 4 implemented national action plans behind, and we are just working on the co-creation of the 5th upcoming NAP. The question is how OGP helps us and our reforms agenda. The constitutions and declarations of all countries state that the human rights are respected, the government works for the benefits of citizens, and the state doesn't decide who will be in power and participate in decision-making processes. But generally, how to achieve this in the process? OGP is a truly mechanism and tool that enables joint actions, bringing together active citizens and CSOs, identifies problems that the government cannot see even in the case of excellent interoperability with eGov tools, bring international donor partners, and we know, and mainly USA, that you underlined the participation and the outcomes of it. And OGP mechanism also improves the skills of the government and citizens for observing and monitoring, especially it's more relevant and work out in communities. It's our last observation. I'll turn to Armenian OGP experience and results in the second part of this session. But I would like to use this opportunity and take a look at the features and the challenges of OGP countries over the last 10 years, especially for the Eastern Partnership countries. Armenia is a part of Eastern Partnership OGP program, where we have 6 post-Soviet Union countries. And what do we see here within the scope of OGP? Where we can measure the democratic progress and put inside different observations like OECD's and Eastern Partnership indicators. Here we have some variability of these indicators like participation, good governance, openness, access to information, open data, and etc. If we look at the 10-year figures, we see that the progress in these countries is not sustainable. Let's be honest. Let's state that it can be a step forward, then step back, or further no progress at all. Last year, Armenia, along with other countries, had to face the local and global challenges of pandemic. But above all, we had to ensure the security of the country and our people during, unfortunately, military escalation. These challenges have shown that Armenia and other countries' previous efforts were not enough to withstand emergencies, and the policy development must be guided by the potential challenges in the future. Here, I would like to highlight a possible approach to which I would like to draw the attention of all of us. First, strategic planning plays a key role in this situation. This is where we need to think about what we want to achieve within OGP, to design commitments that will solve problems at the moment, which could turn into fragmental ones, or to tackle commitments arising from strategic planning documents and views, both global and local. In this regards, having the opportunity, I appeal more to our USA partners, as they are founding partners of OGP and are interested in fostering the democratic processes and values in OGP member countries. I propose USA think about separate OGP programs that can be envisaged for the member states in order to bring OGP national action plans closer to the long-term and short-term strategic directions of that country, exact country. And at first, this will great help to analyze the previous processes and support countries that are constrained for tackling commitments due to the lack of financial and other issues. It's just especially for Eastern Partnership countries. And by the way, you have a good experience with Georgia. This could be the idea of a new OGP barometer with some new algorithms. And my second resort to IRM. I'm happy to see Tina here. Sometimes countries are committed to implementing diverse reforms that have essential matter for the society and the exact country. But here, the IRM hasn't a chance to measure the ambition and impact of it due to the lack of implementation period time. 2 years are very little to achieve more realistic and effective results, and moreover, to measure their impact. We have a good example with the local OGP, where we have up to 4 years implementation. I would like to address these issues to all of us, as I think it's very essential, and would be happy to discuss any other questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lilia. And you brought up some very important points, I think, on sequencing and sustainability that are as important for the OGP initiative generally as they are for embedding some of these commitments going long term. I'd like to turn back to Michael to some of what you started to talk about, but in particular, thinking about some of the commitments that we heard last week at the Summit for Democracy. Which ones, if any, really strike you as being ripe to integrate into some of our national action plans?
Thanks, Jen. Well, first, I wanted to just make a point that in the conversations with our funder membership, but more importantly, with a lot of the civil society groups who have been engaging around this summit process, is that there seems to be a common feeling that what happened last week was a wonderful start and a political moment, as has been said, but it's only the beginning. And there's energy to try and think how to best use this year of action most meaningfully. And one way would be, to some extent, be inspired by that beneficial ownership leadership group that OGP have shepherded. And let's create cohorts on particular themes where there's an overlap of interest among countries and among stakeholders, and think of a way to refine the commitments that will be coming in January, but also to think about what are the next generation of commitments that we want that show ambition and that will be properly tailored to the issues of the day. And I think the level of interest from civil society is something that we can capitalize on through that process. I think there's potential to bring in private sector. Obviously, government is core to that. And I was excited to see Administrator Powell reference this idea last week. And I think it would be really valuable if USAID and other government partners were able to help do some of the analysis of these commitments as they're finalized and encourage countries to think about what might be cohorts they could join or propose and help lead. And I think there are some areas where OGP itself could be a natural venue to lead some of these cohort discussions. One might be simply an expansion of the beneficial ownership leadership group. If there would be a way to think even of allowing in countries that have not been OGP members to date, but have started to make commitments on that issue, perhaps there's a way to involve them in those conversations and encourage them, which might also have spillover interest into OGP membership itself. But coming back to your starting point, Jen, I can already see some clusters of areas where there would be strong interest. I think there's a thread around technology and democracy from the summit last week, where there's a lot to be done, but also a lot of interest in energy. I think there's issues around real estate transparency, where the US is setting a lead, but the UK made some interesting commitments, and others hopefully will come in around that as well. And thinking beyond sort of the anti-corruption pillar of the summit, but also to the human rights and anti-authoritarianism elements, I think even areas around like clean infrastructure development for the energy transition, I think we're going to start to see more commitments that overlap with climate concerns, but also good governance concerns and links to democracy. And that will be a fascinating area. Or even sort of worker empowerment and worker rights and how that needs to function in and be integral to a successful democracy. So I think not all of these are going to be appropriate for OGP, but I think the model that OGP lays out is going to be good inspiration. And I suspect there will be one or two areas where perhaps they would want to take a leadership role. And hopefully we can mobilize, as I say, the political will, but also some resources to back those processes and ensure that we get the best ideas from government and civil society. And next year we have a wonderful set of newer commitments that we'll then be able to monitor and track going on into 2023. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Well, you led right into where I wanted to go with this, which was about the resources that might be available to OGP countries. And really here, I'm not talking about financial resources, but technical and peer learning resources, as well as the resources we might need in the learning space to really be able to track and measure progress against these commitments. What kinds of indicators and metrics and data and assessment do we need to build in to really understand how we seize this political moment and make something of it? So Tinatin, that's really my question to you. What resources are available for OGP countries in terms of peer learning and support for implementation of some of these commitments?
Well, Michael already mentioned some of the thematic groups from OGP. I think the Beneficial Ownership Leadership Group is one of the very good examples of a concrete thematic group where OGP can support implementation and also build the momentum and encourage its members to take up similar commitments and also provide very technical targeted support. But there are also other thematic groups, such as the Civic Network, for example, as well. And we did hear last week, out of the more concrete commitments, we did see a lot of commitments that are about safeguarding and expanding civic space, but also not only in terms of improving the operating environment for civil society organizations, but also media, investigative journalists. And there has been a lot of focus on inclusion, gender equality, and giving more voice to marginalized groups, so to say. So all of these issues are really at the heart of OGP and have been the focus of the thematic groups, and also communities of practice that are emerging on sub-regional levels as well. We do have, for example, more thematic work that's going on in the Americas, focusing on environmental rights, for example, in the defenders of environment, and as well as other groups such as, again, Beneficial Ownership Practice Group emerging in the Western Balkans, etc. So there are really several ways in which OGP can help practically. Of course, co-creation model, which I've already spoken about, is one way which can really ensure that the commitments are well planned out and are also the ones that really represent the interests and ownership by the civil society. Thematic networks is another one. And again, I have to go back to my team and say that the existence of the strong accountability mechanisms, the IRM, is really crucial because we not only help to hold countries to account, but we also provide a lot of learning. A lot of the information that comes out on how the countries are doing, what are the success stories, what are the factors contributing to better results, are all coming from the IRM. And even though they assess commitments in shorter time spent, so to say, to go back to Lilia's point, we do provide information at least on early results, and we always watch out whether commitments are being carried over to see whether the reforms are sustainable and are actually gaining enough momentum and resources that are needed.
Thank you so much, Tinatin. And yeah, just to underscore the amazing wealth of resources that the IRM really does produces, and our hope that they can be used really to help inform some of this commitment process, the co-creation and ultimately the implementation process of these commitments. I'd like to turn to our two government colleagues to talk a little bit about, in particular, you talked earlier about using OGP as a platform for reform more generally, but in particular, how is your government looking at using OGP potentially to help deliver on the commitments that are being made as part of the Summit for Democracy? Lydia, why don't I come over to you first?
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, democratic values are very important. It should be in minds, behavior, and in souls of the people. Let's at first turn to what the Armenian Prime Minister stated during the Democracy Forum. he stated that we are committed to consolidate the consolidation of democracy in Armenia through strengthening democratic institutions by embracing transparency and accountability. We are planning governance reforms and implementation of policies that will build faith both in Armenia and among our partner abroad. By 2016, to achieve improvements by rising World Bank's Worldwide Governance Indicator score from 15 to 16, and Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index from 49 to 60. He stated that we are facing multiple challenges during the bid to consolidate our democracy. That challenge is compounded when threats arise from behind our borders. If we are to restore the appeal of democracy throughout the world, we need to join forces to face these challenges together. Can OGP support to achieve of these ambitions? Indeed. As we have mentioned, we implemented 4 national action plans and have got experience and skills from this process. OGP is a testing crisis management mechanism for solving internal problems. The whole philosophy of the OGP is not about which commitments the government will tackle, but about making the process collaborative, using participatory technologies and mechanisms. From NAP to NAP, we have developed more citizen-needed and citizen-oriented transformative commitments. And these achievements have been facilitated by using more participation methods like crowdsourcing, focus on thematic discussions, town hall meetings, and open public meetings and exhibitions. These are the main methods where the user is not a passive beneficiary, but an expert in their own social changings. What do these methods improve? The trust towards the government, actions and regulations of institutions. The second achievement is setting up institutional participation within the legislative and public notion processes. We launched within the OGP e-draft portal for legal acts and law drafts, where all citizens participate on an equal basis, vote, leave messages for each draft. After voting and comments, the government responds to user directly. It's very important. It's very important communication and statement. Then we have a petition portal immediately after the launch of it. We solved social significant issues during the COVID. It's very important for OGP implementers. And another ambitious initiative is the state public service monitoring and evaluation mechanism, in which citizens directly assess the services they receive and propose suggestions for their improvements. And the third ambition of OGP is ensuring transparency and accountability of the state institutions. In these regards, the request of citizens and NGOs and investigative journals, we set up a register of disclosure of real owners, beneficial ownership register, where citizens can find and oversight who controls the exact entity and stand on the pyramid. We give additional privilege to investigative journalists to carry out their activities without any fee. It's very important. It should be noted that Armenia joined to Beneficial Ownership Leadership Group and is committed to line with other countries to develop the policies related to the BO standards and other issues. The political will and readiness of the Armenian government was shown in the last observation of the Open Ownership team, where they stated that the Armenia and Latvia became the first countries to publish data using the beneficial ownership data standard to their company registers. This commitment essentially improves the corruption perception index to get Armenia from 35 to 49. It's a huge step for us, frankly speaking. We are proud to bring the commitment to transparency in public finances, which direct beneficiaries are CSOs. We are happy for this, as We have an excellent example where the entire legislative documents and the processes of implementation of this commitment were developed by CSOs. But we aren't stopped and looking forward to setting the commitments on open procurement, of course, with the immediate joint participation of CSOs and experts. I'm hoping that the next fifth National Action Plan will close the gaps that we have faced and help us to set sustainable democratic values, principles, and of course, culture over the country. It takes political will, partnership with many parties, which we have ensured through OGP processes, and public demand and legitimacy, which we need to address constantly. Hope it's not too long for you, and happy to discuss other questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's fantastic to hear all the plans you have in place. It's very inspiring. Carlos, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about how the Dominican Republic is thinking to use OGP around the Summit for Democracy Commitments.
Como no, muchas gracias. Bueno, lo primero es tener la claridad de poder alinear las iniciativas, los planes vinculados a la Alianza de Gobierno Abierto a las acciones y mandato en el ámbito local. La República Dominicana ha transitado un camino de poder alinear su Estrategia Nacional de Desarrollo. Recientemente hemos lanzado el Plan Plurianual del Sector Público, que tiene una priorización de las políticas del Gobierno del Cambio, que está centrada en distintos objetivos, distintos ejes, teniendo como eje central la calidad de vida de la gente. Lo importante de tener una estrategia nacional de desarrollo que está alineada a la Agenda 2030 de Desarrollo Sostenible, un plan plurianual que está planteando como visión del Gobierno del Cambio, pues poder impulsar una sociedad que esté basada precisamente en el poder ciudadano y sostenida en un marco de derechos, de solidaridad, de democracia, de participación, que pueda transformar el modelo productivo y potenciar la innovación y la tecnología. Como ustedes pueden ver, precisamente en nuestro plan plurianual nosotros estamos incluyendo la esencia, los principios fundamentales de las acciones o los eventuales compromisos que estemos asumiendo y que estemos renovando en el marco de la Alianza de Gobierno Abierto. El poder ciudadano, la innovación, la tecnología como garante y como eje fundamental para transformar nuestras sociedades. Pero además de esto hay que señalar que la República Dominicana también cuenta con un plan de recuperación económica post-COVID. Y en ese plan de recuperación económica post-COVID, uno de los ejes fundamentales del proceso de reforma, de transformación, pues propiciar mayor participación de todos los actores de la sociedad dominicana para poder construir e impulsar el desarrollo necesario de nuestros países, para reactivar la economía y para poder generar empleo. Entonces, es una excelente oportunidad de potenciar todos los mecanismos de participación, porque sobre la base de una agenda de recuperación económica existe mayor interés, mayor disposición de participar, de sentarnos, de poder conversar, y si lo hacemos a través de todas las plataformas que hemos estado poniendo y que debemos seguir poniendo, de datos abiertos, de información veraz, objetiva, de información en tiempo real, podemos ayudar y a contribuir a que el debate de la agenda nacional pueda ser mucho más efectivo y que se pueda elevar el mismo. Hay que señalar que en el marco de todo este proceso, pues también se ha convocado a un diálogo nacional con la participación de todos los actores del gobierno dominicano, del Estado, de sociedad civil, empresariado, la academia, los partidos políticos, donde se ha construido ya una agenda de reforma que va a implicar modificaciones importantes de la ley de compras y contrataciones, de la ley de acceso a información, de la ley de función pública, de la ley de contraloría, de la ley de presupuesto. Quiere decir que en el país estamos sentados en una mesa de diálogo con todos los actores, incluyendo los partidos políticos, todos discutiendo esa agenda de reforma, y al tiempo que esto pasa y esto transcurre, pues nos acercamos a los compromisos vinculados a la cumbre de la democracia, y además recientemente se acaba de constituir por decreto el grupo multipartícipe que va a impulsar el próximo plan de acción de la República Dominicana, que es liderado por la Dirección de Ética e Integridad Gubernamental. Actualmente existe un compromiso importante de articulación, de vinculación, de diálogo, en términos de procesos, en términos de instancias, pero también asimismo están avanzando las conversaciones de importantes plataformas tecnológicas en la República Dominicana, y eso también sirve para generar información de mucho más calidad. Por lo que debo decir que siento que estamos en un momento importante para construir un nuevo plan de acción que pueda impulsar, que pueda potenciar los mandatos de la Constitución, de la Estrategia Nacional de Desarrollo, de nuestros planes plurianuales y, por qué no, también de nuestro plan de recuperación. Ningún compromiso de OGP luego del impacto de la pandemia puede no tocar de manera medular lo que son transformaciones de derechos de la gente en educación, en salud, en vivienda, en agua, y que todo esto conduzca a generar empleo. La conversación de OGP, además de los puntos anticorrupción, tiene que ser una conversación vinculada al desarrollo y vinculada a dinamizar la economía de nuestros países que fueron impactadas gravemente por la pandemia.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I'd like to, just in the interest of time, go ahead and move us into a little bit of a question and answer, just so we can get some thoughts from this audience. And then I'll regroup with a question I have for all of you, perhaps as a way to finish up. I'd like to give a chance for Joe Powell to come in. I think he may have a question for this group. Joe, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everyone. Fantastic discussion. The question I guess I had, it relates to something I think everyone's mentioned, which is are there some thematic areas that are more suited to this cross-country collaboration and that kind of fit within this global commitment-making kind of agenda, but also as the last speaker was saying, it has to be very contextualized in terms of what local communities want. And sometimes there's a tension, right? Which is that some people come to big global summits like last week and this week, and they announce things on the global stage, but they're not necessarily rooted in the demand of local communities. And I think that's where OGP has tried to play a bridge. So I'm just curious if any of the panelists could give us some thoughts on beyond beneficial ownership, which is kind of a global standard that has to be adopted by different countries in a similar way, to think through some of these other topics that might be suitable for taking forward. That was my question, Jen.
I'm so sorry I wasn't able to unmute. Who would like to take that first? Is there someone? Michael, would you like to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think it ties to another question that's coming up around this potential disconnect between the executive, who tends to be sort of represented in these summits, and then line ministries who then have to be responsible for implementing these types of commitments. So you want the connections within government, and then you want the connections between governments working on similar issues. And I do think it's not a surprise that the topics that are getting more immediate traction for these sort of peer-to-peer are those where there is a emerging standard to sort of be the point of reference. So beneficial ownership is one, open contracting and their data standard is another. I think some of the issues around regulation of tech also lends itself to that, and will increasingly so. And it gets harder when you're talking about some of these issues, such as this really important issue that's raised in the chat around gender equality and commitments made on that, which could be much more varied in context and in the nature of those commitments. And so what is the kind of support that can be provided there? And at least that's where OGP as a standing platform, like it's not something that has to be reinvented for like particular contexts, is there. I think that perhaps, OGP is well placed to sort of see where those emerging topics are and sort of think innovatively about ways that you can encourage useful conversation between countries on those. And not force things that, the last thing you want to do is require people to be part of processes that are a distraction from their day jobs and then don't add value. But I do think there will be a growing number of topics where there are ways forward. And there are some models also from the corporate sector and processes of bringing increased standards around corporate disclosure in those areas, extractive industries, transparency initiative being the most foremost, but there are others too. So we should look for lessons from that side as well. But I do think it's a challenge for these ones where it's not built around a standard per se, like what is the right model of engagement? And perhaps our country colleagues on the speakers with me will have ideas on that.
That's a very astute observation. I think, Michael, what we would call sort of an input or output oriented commitment, right? Is that easier for us to generalize and to have broader commitment to because it is precisely a standard, right? It's a register, it's passing a law, it's passing a new regulation, but these more nebulous areas of reform require broader commitment, right? And more actors involved. And so there's a good question in the chat, which you referenced earlier, about how government points of contact can engage other ministries to really help get them on board. And Lilia, perhaps since that is your job as a government point of contact, you could share some of your reflections on that, how you can get others on board.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's very important to point where point of contact should convey the global commitments and challenges that we heard from different events, sessions, and bring them closer to the national and local ones. It's very important and it's our mission. And to be honest, sometimes you have to resort to diplomacy and diverse approaches. But all in all, I think your ministers and officials who are in charge should trust you and believe on your honest approach and skills and abilities. I can say that there is an exact methods that I use. Just I try to localize any challenge and close it to our national and local one. And I would like to also refer to Joe's questions related to BO. It was very challenging for us to localize BO standards and work on different adjustments and regulations. We had different amendments in cross-cutting laws, but finally we could succeed. But still, we should answer the general questions. How can this process prevent corruption and money laundering? I mean, in general field. It's very important question, as here we should bring all stakeholders, CSOs, investigative journalists, and other international partners. This is the gap that we were discussing with our partners from Ministry of Justice and other agencies. And still, I would like to hear the answer. How can these prevent the corruption and bring the process in line? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lilia. Carlos, I think I saw your hand up earlier, and I know that the Dominican Republic has a very interesting experience in terms of building this broad commitment across the government with your high-level dialogue. I wonder what your perspective is on the ways that you can build that broader consensus.
Lo primero es que la voluntad de crear y co-crear de manera colectiva tiene que ser franca y tiene que ser real, que pueda generar la confianza. Y en ese proceso también hay que identificar compromisos que sean relevantes, que sean realizables y que ningún proceso de elaboración de manera colectiva pueda asomar o pueda acercarse a generar nuevas frustraciones. Los pueblos han llegado a unos niveles de hartazgo que no permite procesos en los cuales las acciones que se impulsen no sea sobre la base de la confianza y de la integridad de los compromisos y de las acciones que se puedan asumir. Y para eso, un elemento fundamental es tener reglas claras de esos procesos de co-creación, poner información a disposición. La mejor forma de mostrar voluntad de construir juntos es poniendo información a disposición, toda la que sea necesaria, y no solamente en cantidad, sino en calidad. Información que pueda ser entendible, que sea veraz, objetiva, que sea información reutilizable, poner a disposición todos los mecanismos de participación que puedan tener los estados. Y además hay que ser muy coherente entre estar llevando procesos sobre la base del principio de la Alianza de Gobierno Abierto y por otro lado las prácticas y las políticas cotidianas de los gobiernos vayan en otra dirección. Tiene que haber coherencia. No estamos en procesos de Alianza de Gobierno Abierto y en el marco de eso cumplimos con principios de transparencia, de participación, pero en otras políticas públicas hacemos todo lo contrario. Tiene que haber una coherencia del discurso, tiene que haber una coherencia de las prácticas y tiene que haber una coherencia de las acciones. Y además creo que es muy importante y necesario también poder poner sobre la agenda prioridades. Nuestros países tienen tanta demanda de tantas cosas que si llevamos a estos procesos de diálogo todo lo que debemos llevar, probablemente no vamos a tener resultados, y los procesos tienen que presentar resultados en el corto plazo, tienen que tener previstos resultados al mediano plazo, pero tiene que ir generando y ganando confianza en la medida que va presentando resultados, y por eso tiene que haber, nosotros utilizamos en la República Dominicana la frase que tenemos que comer mangos bajitos, hay que comerse mangos bajitos, hay que ir avanzando en esa construcción colectiva. Y creo que así se genera confianza, así hay resultados y así podemos instaurar, porque yo veo esto como un modelo de relación de Estado y sociedad, que lo estamos canalizando, lo estamos sembrando en la administración pública sobre la base de esta metodología de la Alianza de Gobierno Abierto, pero que debe ser la práctica que prime en la relación del Estado con la sociedad. El mandante, el mandatario, quien tiene el poder, quien ejerce el poder, y el soberano que instruye, el ciudadano que demanda y exige el cumplimiento de las disposiciones que están establecidas. Pienso así a grandes rasgos que eso puede dar una idea de cómo podemos avanzar en los compromisos y cómo podemos generar confianza. Y claro está, creo que alguien lo decía, no hay receta mágica, cada contexto tiene su mirada para esto.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. I think we've laid out a lot of the opportunities and key considerations in terms of really seizing this political moment, as Michael said, that was created, translating these promises, these high-level statements into concrete actions. And there's no doubt, I think, in our minds that OGP provides that platform for engagement, for real meaningful co-creation. In many cases, countries have come to the table with ideas and very clear directions, but the details need to be worked out with civil society. And we're very hopeful that of the 45 OGP countries that have initially stated commitments as part of the summit, that they take the opportunity and the platform and the resources and peer learning that are available to really make these meaningful. I just want to thank all of our panelists for being on today. It's been great to hear both the country level experiences and the global perspectives. And just to reiterate that USAID is so proud to support OGP implementation, so eager to support countries in terms of making some of these connections across the Summit for Democracy and OGP platforms. So thank you all very much. Congratulations to OGP on 10 successful years, and thanks for being part of this session.
Thank you.
Thanks.